Welcome back, everyone. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a situation, a story really, that a listener sent to us.
Yeah, and it's a story about a young mother, only 20 years old, and wow, those first few months with a newborn. It's a lot.
I mean, anyone who's been there knows how tough it can be. And you all really responded to this one. Lots of you wanted to hear more about this and think through it together. So that's what we are going to do. Unpack the realities for this young mom, but also, really try to figure out some ways to support her and maybe offer a little encouragement because she's clearly going through a lot right now.
Yeah, and this listener, she really shared a lot of details, which is fantastic because it gives us a really clear picture of what's going on emotionally, all the support systems or lack thereof, it sounds like, and really what she's considering for the future.
So we can really dive deep here. And the goal, like always, is to understand, the challenges these young moms face, and then hopefully pull out some real insights that can make a difference.
Right, make a difference. Okay, let's jump in.
All right, so the story starts with an unplanned pregnancy. She was in her first year of university when it happened.
Wow, so young.
Yeah. The baby is now 3 months old, and right away, even with, the unplanned part of it all, she's really embraced being a mom. It's a pretty powerful place to start, I think.
Yeah, that initial embrace, that commitment right from the beginning, that says a lot about her strength.
Hmm.
But as we read on, we see she's facing a lot of challenges, and a big one is the loss of support from her own mom. That's a really key part of this whole situation.
Yeah. And it's more than just a lack of support. The relationship with her mom has gotten really bad since the pregnancy.
Oh, why?
It sounds like her mom actually moved out, isn't in contact anymore.
Oh my gosh.
And she's living in this townhouse that she used to rent out. So for this young mom, you can just imagine, the feelings of abandonment, of isolation. It's got to be really, really tough.
I mean, it's huge, right?
Yeah.
It's that core maternal figure. So often, a new mom relies on her own mom for everything.
Hmm.
Practical help, advice in the middle of the night, just someone to be there and say, it's all going to be okay.
Right.
To have that suddenly gone, especially right after having a baby, it's a unique kind of loss, I think.
Yeah. And it doesn't end there. She also mentioned that her two siblings live with their mom, and they're not offering any support either.
Oh, wow.
So she really is on her own, living alone with this 3-month-old baby. And I mean, that isolation, that constant exhaustion, it really comes through in her story. I mean, she's overwhelmed by the 24/7 care a newborn needs.
Yeah. And the thing is, taking care of a newborn is a 24/7 job, even with a good support system.
Oh, totally.
But when you're alone,
Yeah.
no breaks, feeding all night, no sleep, I mean, it just wears you down.
Hmm.
Physically, mentally, I mean, you can just feel it reading her words.
She did say that a cleaner comes in once a month to help with the house, with the baby. But she specifically says it's just not enough. It doesn't really help with the stress. And you can really sense, that emotional toll, those feelings of defeat. It's rough.
It's rough. It's like someone is trying to help, but it's just a drop in the bucket
Yeah.
when you're facing this much every single day.
Ah,
And those feelings of defeat, that's a warning sign.
yeah.
It could lead to burnout, and it just highlights how much she needs that real consistent support.
Now, she did mention that the baby's father is somewhat involved. He does give her some money for essentials and stuff, and sometimes offers advice even though they're not together anymore. But I mean, that might sound okay on the surface, but what's the real story here?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the emotional support just isn't there, which is what she really needs. She talked about feeling unsupported with all the everyday parenting stuff. He doesn't communicate much. And even though the financial help is important, she feels alone in managing everything. She needs a partner, even if it's not a romantic one.
Right, it's like a transactional thing instead of an emotional connection, a real shared responsibility in raising this child, even if they're not living together. And then on top of that, it's not just the immediate family. Her extended family isn't really helping either. No aunts or other relatives stepping in to offer any real support.
It makes you think about how isolated she must feel. In other families, aunts and uncles, they they help out with meals, babysit for a few hours, or even just listen. Without that, it's no wonder she feels like her mom, even though they aren't close, is the only one who could have really helped.
And that brings us to the emotional burden she's carrying. I mean, she says she's depressed, overwhelmed, just constantly dealing with this isolation. And it's all just making her feel like she's failing as a mom, which is just, I mean, that's just heartbreaking to hear.
And that feeling of failure, it's common for new parents, especially when they're facing so many challenges.
Right.
But when you add in the isolation and the exhaustion, the doubts just take over. And then you get the depression and the anxiety, and it all feeds into each
Really the
other.
vicious cycle. And she even mentioned how the baby crying, which is completely normal for a 3-month-old, that actually makes her exhaustion worse.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like this horrible feedback loop of stress and overwhelm. And I think this is where it's really important to step back and look at the bigger picture. What are the key emotional and psychological things that are coming out of her story?
Right. Okay, so the first one, and probably the most obvious, is this deep emotional isolating. And it's more than just being physically alone with a baby. It's that feeling of being totally cut off from the people who could help her emotionally and practically at a time when she needs them the most.
Right.
And it leads to this intense loneliness and feeling like no one gets it, like
Yeah.
no one understands what she's going through.
And then that isolation goes hand in hand with the second big theme, the overwhelming responsibility. She's the only one responsible for absolutely everything the baby needs: feeding, changing, comforting, constantly being on alert. And she's got to take care of herself, too. It's just a recipe for burnout.
Absolutely. And when you think about the bigger picture,
Mm.
society puts so much pressure on mothers, especially young single mothers. There's this idea of a motherhood that's just not real. And it
Yeah.
doesn't match up with the constant demands and the lack of resources and support that so many moms face.
Exactly. And the third theme that really stuck out to me was this fear of making the wrong decision. This one's really tough. She's actually thinking about sending the baby to live with his father. He lives far away, but she doesn't think she can handle it.
Wow.
And the emotional toll of that decision must be immense.
That's a huge decision. I
Yeah.
mean, it shows just how desperate she is,
Mm.
how little confidence she has in herself right now. And that lack of confidence, it's clearly tied to not having any support.
Yeah.
The thought of losing her child, of having less contact, even the worry that something could happen in a different environment, it's just got to be incredibly stressful for her.
And it's so clear that she's only considering this because she's struggling so much, not because she doesn't love her child.
Right, right.
And then finally, when you take all of that together, the exhaustion, the feeling like she's failing, the lack of support, it leads to the fourth big theme: emotional strain and depression. It's just so understandable.
It is. It really shows how important social support is for mental health, especially after having a baby. What might start as, those normal baby blues can turn into full-blown postpartum depression if there's no one there to help.
You're right.
It's a reminder that taking care of a mom's mental health is essential for the whole family.
Okay, so now that we've talked about the challenges she's facing, what can we do? What advice can we offer, especially focusing on supporting and encouraging young moms like her?
Right.
And it's important to remember we're not talking about quick fixes here, but, possible ways forward, things that might offer some hope. And the first thing that seems crucial is finding those support networks.
Yeah, getting emotional support is essential in this situation. Connecting with friends, maybe finding a support group for new moms where she can talk to other people who get it, or even, talking to a professional who specializes in maternal mental health.
Hmm.
Sometimes just having someone who understands to talk to can make a world of difference.
And those parenting groups can be amazing too. Online, in person, it doesn't matter. They're full of moms who've been there, who can offer advice, who know what it's really like. It's just so powerful to realize you're not alone in all of this.
Totally. And in those groups, she might find some really practical advice or resources that she hasn't even thought of.
Mhm.
Other moms who've dealt with similar stuff might have some great coping mechanisms, or they might know about local services that could really help.
Right. The second thing to think about, even though it's a tricky co-parenting situation, is talking to the baby's father. I mean, they're not together, but being open and honest about what she's struggling with seems so important for both of them and for the baby.
Definitely. Talking things through can help to see, how much support he can actually offer. And it doesn't have to just be about money. Maybe he can help with some of the actual childcare, even just a few hours a week so she can get a break.
Right. If they can work out some kind of co-parenting plan, even if they're living apart, figure out their roles in raising their child, that could make a huge difference in how much she's carrying on her own. It's all about sharing the responsibility.
Exactly. And she needs to be able to talk about her emotional needs too, not just the practical stuff. He might not realize how isolated and exhausted she feels if she doesn't say something. Those conversations can be hard, but they're so important for him to see the whole picture.
Okay, and the third thing, and this one is so important for any mom who's feeling this overwhelmed, Boundaries and self-care. No, I know that can sound impossible when you're taking care of a newborn, but it's so crucial for her in the long run.
It really is. It's about realizing that even though her baby needs her all the time, it's okay to have boundaries. It's okay to take breaks. It's not selfish. It's essential. It's about protecting her own mental health, which is also good for the baby.
Yeah. And self-care doesn't have to be some big fancy thing. It can be a long shower where she can be alone for a few minutes, or reading a book, or going for a quick walk. Even small moments like that can make a big difference in how stressed she feels. And asking for help, we talked about that that's a form of self-care too.
Yeah, totally. It's about moving away from this idea that she has to do everything herself and realizing that asking for help is actually a sign of strength. It means she's taking care of herself and her baby.
Exactly. Now, the fourth thing to think about is childcare. Even if it seems hard or expensive, just a few hours of a break could make a huge difference for her mental health.
Right. Maybe there's a relative, even a distant one, or a close friend who could watch the baby every now and then. That could give her some much needed time to rest. And if it's possible, maybe even looking into professional childcare just a few hours a week so she can recharge or take care of things she needs to do.
And like we talked about with support networks, checking out local resources is a really good idea. A lot of places have free or low-cost services for new moms, including childcare help and mental health support. Getting connected to those services can be a lifesaver when you're feeling isolated.
It can be. There are often way more resources than people realize, so
Yeah.
it's always worth looking into what's available in her area.
Now, the last thing to think about is long-term stability. How to make things more stable for her and her baby in the long run. Creating a routine can help with that. It can make things feel less chaotic and stressful.
Definitely. Having a rhythm to the day for both her and the baby can make things feel more in control, especially when so much of parenting a newborn feels unpredictable. It can also help her carve out a little time for herself each day, even if it's just for a few minutes.
And on a practical level, looking into resources for single mothers, things like financial planning and support, whether from the government or from charities, that could really help ease the financial burden and give her a little more security for the future.
Yeah, taking some of that financial pressure off can make a big difference. It lets her focus more on her well-being and on being a mom. It's a key part of the whole picture.
And it's so important to remember, even with everything she's dealing with, how strong she is. Just reaching out, even indirectly through us, shows that she wants things to be better, and that's huge.
It is. She's already showing so much strength in handling all of this.
Yeah,
And asking for help is part of that strength.
exactly. Okay, so to wrap up, let's go over the main points one more time. We've talked about the huge challenges young mothers face, especially the impact of emotional isolation and the lack of support. But we've also talked about some ways to find that support. Connecting with others, talking openly with the baby's father, making time for self-care, thinking about childcare, and working towards a more stable future.
And to anyone listening who might be going through something similar or who knows someone who is, remember that community, communication, and self-care are so important. They're not luxuries, they're essential.
And one last thought to leave you with. Think about how our society, our communities, can either help young mothers or make things harder for them. How can we as individuals reach out and offer real help and encouragement to those who are figuring out parenthood, especially in those early days? How can we create a world where no young mom feels completely alone?
Something to think about. It's on all of us.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.